Tonight, the land beneath your feet is listening, and it knows the exact moment you stopped believing in monsters. I learned that the hard way at exactly 2:07 in the morning, alone in my little basement studio, when the doorbell sang its single, flat note like a dying bird. I was hunched over my mixing board, trying to force enthusiasm into the intro of episode 83 of Crow's Hollow, my true crime podcast that had recently started bleeding into true stranger territory. The mic was hot, my voice was cold, and the coffee had gone bitter an hour earlier. I just muttered something like, "Welcome back, night crawlers," when that chime cut through my headphones like a scalpel. I froze, fingers still on the record button, the red light staring at me like an angry eye. No delivery company runs after midnight in our nowhere town. No neighbors for 2 miles. No reason on earth. Yet the bell rang again. One note, same pitch, but somehow more urgent, as if the house itself were insisting. My pulse became the metronome for the silence that followed. I killed the track, peeled off my headphones, and crept upstairs, each creak of the staircase sounding like a warning whispered by the wood itself. I reached the front door and pressed my eye to the peephole. Nothing. Just the porch light carving a perfect circle onto the driveway and the mailbox leaning like it had heard something it wished it hadn't. But there, on the welcome mat that never welcomed anyone, sat a box. Not a cardboard shipping box, something metallic, about the size of a hardcover novel, its surface catching the porch light and throwing it back in jagged shards. Steam, or maybe just heat haze, curled up from the edges. I could smell it even through the door. Wet iron, the scent of pennies left in rainwater. My hand hesitated on the deadbolt. Every instinct screamed, leave it, call the sheriff, go back to pretending the world still made sense. But curiosity is a louder monster. I cracked the door. Warm night air rolled in, thick as syrup. The box pulsed once, like a heartbeat. I swear I heard it. I knelt, fingertips brushing the lid. The metal was fever hot. Whatever had seeped from the corners had dried into rusty freckles that flaked under my touch. No return address, no markings except for one small label, handwritten in brown. Play me before the sun dies. I carried the thing inside like a bomb that had already gone off. Back in the studio, I set the box on my desk beside the microphone. The overhead light flickered once, twice, then steadied, but the shadows didn't. I opened the lid. Inside, cradled in black velvet that smelled of damp soil, lay a single chrome cassette, the kind we used to call a 90-minute eternity. Its reels were already turning, slow as a funeral march, though nothing moved them. I could feel the air grow thick, like someone had filled the room with syrup and regret. My hands shook as I slid the tape into the old Nakamichi deck I kept for authentic atmosphere. I hit record on my workstation, habit, maybe superstition, and then pressed play on the deck. A hiss poured out, not the gentle white noise of magnetic tape, but something alive, something breathing. It sounded like wind through barbed wire, like cattle lowing in a language older than words. Then, under that, a voice, not male, not female, not even human, whispered my name. Elias. I leaned closer to the speaker, heart kicking against my ribs like it wanted out. The voice repeated, softer, as if moving farther away, yet somehow inside my skull. Before the sun dies, Elias, before it forgets you. My own recorder captured everything. I watched the waveform bloom on the screen, jagged peaks that looked disturbingly like teeth. Then the tape clicked, end of side 1. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I stared at the spinning reels, waiting for them to stop. They didn't. They reversed. The hiss returned, but now it carried something else, the distant sound of hooves on stone, the creak of a gate that hadn't been opened since before my grandmother was born, and underneath it all, a wet, rhythmic dripping, like blood hitting dust in perfect 4/4 time. I should have ejected the cassette, should have hurled it into the yard and set the whole mess on fire. Instead, I reached for the volume knob, fingers trembling. Just as I touched it, every light in the studio died. The computer screen blinked once, then went black, yet the waveform kept crawling across the darkness, ghostly green, as if the machine no longer needed electricity. That was when I felt it. Pressure against my eardrums, like the room had suddenly dropped 1,000 feet. The headphones I'd left hanging on the mic stand began to swing gently, though no breeze stirred, and from them, clear as a promise, came a new sound. My own voice, recorded 5 minutes from now, saying, "Turn around, Elias. It's already inside." I hadn't said it yet, but I would. And that's where the tape ends. No, that's where the tape begins. So I sat there in the dark, headphones still warm around my neck, the last echo of my own future voice curling around my skull like cigarette smoke. It clears throat. The room smelled of hot circuitry and cold fear. My thumb hovered over the rewind button, trembling like a tuning fork that had just been struck by something ancient. And then, from the speakers, not the headphones, mind you, but the open-air speakers I'd muted hours ago, came the low, mournful sound of cattle. Distant, hollow, like it had wandered in from another county, another decade. I hadn't cued that track. I hadn't cued any track. Somewhere behind that bovine lament, a child whispered. Not spoke, whispered. The way you do when you're sharing a secret so terrible it has to be folded small enough to fit between heartbeats. 40 degrees, 39 minutes, 27 seconds north. 109 degrees, 56 minutes, 24 seconds west. Coordinates. My skin prickled because I recognized the numbers. I'd scribbled them on the back of the Parcel label the night before. Skinwalker Ranch. The place I'd sworn I would never think about again, let alone visit, and yet here it was, riding the breath of a child who might never have been born. The tape glitched, no other word for it. A razor-thin slice of static sheared the cattle call in half, and suddenly, the waveform on the monitor wasn't crawling anymore. It lunged, a single, savage spike that punched the VU meter into the red and held it there, trembling. And underneath, unmistakable, came my own voice, not the one I'd heard before, but older, frayed, as if someone had taken the original recording and rubbed it against a cheese grater. "Ilias," it said, "don't rewind, please. If you love anything, anything at all." The plea cut off with the wet pop of a throat closing around itself. I should have listened. Of course I didn't. My thumb had already decided for me, slamming the rewind key like it was the only safe place left in the world. The reel spun backward, tape hissing like a nest of copper snakes. And then, the lights died. Not flickered, not dimmed. Died. A sudden, absolute absence of photons, as though someone had unscrewed reality itself. I felt the chair vanish beneath me. I couldn't tell if I was sitting or floating or simply ceasing to exist in that one black instant. Silence, not the quiet of an empty house, but the silence of a throat held underwater. I counted heartbeats, 1, 2, 3, until the overhead fluorescent stuttered back to life. They buzzed an angry, anemic white. Every compass in the room, my phone, the old Boy Scout one I kept for luck, even the tiny dial on the reel-to-reel, was spinning like dervishes. North chased north again, faster than any magnet had a right to move. The tape had stopped mid-rewind, leaving a slack ribbon drooping between the reels like a tongue too tired to speak. I reached for the power switch, but my hand froze halfway. The sandwich on the desk had changed. Where there had been wheat bread and wilted lettuce, there was now something red and wet, folded neatly as origami. It pulsed, once, twice, then lay still. I told myself it was corned beef, even though I don't keep meat in the studio. Corned beef doesn't breathe, Elias. You know this. From the hallway came the unmistakable crunch of dry sage. Not footsteps, something lighter, more deliberate. Each crunch was followed by a soft drag, like a burlap sack being pulled across gravel. I told myself the wind had carried tumbleweed all the way from the ranch, 200 miles south, and deposited it in my apartment building's corridor. Rationalizations taste like copper pennies when your mouth is this dry. The dragging stopped just outside the door. I waited for a knock, a creak, anything. Instead, the doorknob began to sweat, beads of moisture forming, racing, dripping onto the carpet in perfect, rhythmic intervals. One drop for every heartbeat I refused to give away. The tape clicked, on its own. No motor engaged, no capstan turning. Just a polite, mechanical snap, as if the deck had decided the show must go on. The reels took up their slack and resumed play, but the speed was wrong. Too slow, as though the tape itself had forgotten how time was supposed to work. My own voice returned, stretched and syrupy. If you're hearing this, Elias, the door is already open. I hadn't said that line yet. I would. I could feel the words forming somewhere behind my teeth, tasting like rust and regret. And then came the scream. Not mine, not the child's. Something older, something that had practiced pain for longer than lungs had existed. It started low, almost amused, then climbed, tearing through octaves like tissue paper until the speakers distorted and the light bulbs flickered in sympathy. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the sound wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was coming from the walls, from the floor, from the very air I was trying not to breathe. The compass needles snapped still, all pointing not north, not south, but straight at my chest. My heartbeat answered them, a second hand ticking toward an appointment I hadn't agreed to keep. The tape clicked again, faster now, almost eager. Turn around, the future me urged, voice jittering like a scratched record. It's already inside. I didn't want to. God, I didn't want to. But my neck moved anyway, vertebrae popping like bubble wrap. And that's when I noticed the smell. Hot iron and sagebrush and something else. Something that reminded me of the way hospitals taste when they think no one is listening. Behind me, the open doorway framed nothing but hallway. Yet the sage kept crunching, closer now, just beyond the threshold where the light gave up. A small handprint appeared on the jamb, red and steaming, fingers splayed as though someone had leaned in to peek. 5 fingers. 6. I hadn't blinked, but the count changed every time I tried to focus. The tape slowed to a crawl, my own voice reduced to a lullaby for the damned. First side, first scream, it crooned. Second side, the sentence snapped off, replaced by a wet inhalation, as if the recorder itself had taken a breath it didn't need. I stared at the doorway, waiting for the shape I knew was forming just beyond sight. The sage crunched once more, then stopped. Silence returned, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was listening. And somewhere inside that listening silence, I could swear I heard the soft, metallic whisper of tape being pulled from its reel, inch, by fingers that had never been human. The compass needles quivered, then all pointed at the doorway. The red light on the deck blinked twice, record, pause, like a wink. It's ready for side 2. The silence didn't leave. It simply folded itself around me like wet wool. I stood there, recorder still hot in my hands, feeling the red light pulse like a second heartbeat. The doorway stayed empty, yet the compass needles kept trembling, all 4 of them aimed at the same nothing. I told myself it was just magnetics, just the old house settling, but the air tasted metallic, like a penny held too long on the tongue. Somewhere behind my teeth, the whispered numbers from side 1 were still looping. 6 digits and a decimal, over and over, until they sounded like a lullaby for something that never slept. I carried the recorder back to the kitchen table, boots sticking to the linoleum with every step. The overhead bulb flickered once, just enough to remind me the house had opinions about electricity. I unfolded my laptop, opened the satellite program, and with fingers that felt borrowed, I typed the coordinates. The screen hesitated, pixels shivering as though the map itself was afraid to load. Then the image snapped into focus, and the breath I'd been holding cracked in my throat. It was the ranch, not a current view. No roads, no fences, no scars of the 21st century. Just 500 acres of raw sage and juniper under a sky the color of old bone. The date stamp read 1974, 5 years before any surveyor ever set foot on that land. I leaned closer, and the cursor moved without my hand, sliding over the northern gate like it knew exactly where to stop. There, frozen in pixelated grain, stood a figure. Small, dark, one hand shading its eyes as it stared straight up. The clothes were mine. The stance was mine. The face was mercifully blurred. I jerked back so hard the chair screeched across the floor. The timestamp on the frame glowed white. Tomorrow. Not a prediction, not a guess. Tomorrow. My stomach folded in on itself like damp paper. I clicked zoom, and the picture obeyed, pulling me down through the atmosphere until I could almost smell the creosote. The gate's chain glinted, the padlock hung open, and the figure, me, shifted weight from one foot to the other, as though the image were only pretending to be still. I reached for the touchpad, and the cursor vanished. When it reappeared, it had become a tiny red dot pulsing over the figure's chest. A target, or maybe a recorder's light. The audio jack on the laptop crackled, though nothing was plugged in. A voice leaked out, thin and papery, like someone speaking through a wall of static. Side 2 begins when the map listens back, it said, syllables folding in on themselves. Clear's throat. I slammed the lid shut, but the voice kept whispering from the hinge, repeating the coordinates again, slower this time, as if teaching them to the metal. I could feel the numbers drilling behind my eyes, carving channels for something to follow. I needed air that didn't taste like old circuitry. I grabbed the recorder, still warm, still blinking, and stepped outside. The night was moonless, the sky a lid of black glass. Every footstep on the gravel sounded double, like someone walking just behind me wearing my same boots. I told myself it was echo, but echoes don't breathe down the back of your neck. At the fence post I stopped, thumbed the recorder's pause button, and held it up like a Geiger counter. The red light flared brighter. The compass needles in my pocket rattled like teeth. A low hum rose from the sage, frequency so low it was more a pressure than a sound. The recorder's counter began to roll backward. 4 minutes, 3, 2, eating its own tape. I felt the ground tilt, or maybe I did. The horizon lifted at the edges like a photograph curling in fire. I smelled ozone, then wet copper, then nothing at all. When I blinked, the ranch gate stood before me, though I hadn't walked that far. The chain was open, the padlock missing, and in the dirt, fresh boot prints, mine, led inside, but only one set, no return. I lifted the recorder. Its display now showed tomorrow's date, and beneath it, a single word in blocky pixels, recording. I hadn't pressed anything. The red light stared like a small, patient eye. Somewhere inside the static, I heard my own voice, not the one in my throat, but the one from the satellite frame, asking a question I hadn't asked yet. What happens to the map when the land stops pretending? I took one involuntary step forward. The recorder clicked, play, not record, and the whispered coordinates spilled out, no longer numbers, but directions, between the second and third wind, where the mirror forgets which side it's on. My legs moved again, puppeteered by my own future footprints. The gate hinges moaned like they'd waited decades for this moment. I crossed the threshold, and the world folded, sky meeting ground with no seam. The recorder's light went black, but the voice kept speaking from everywhere at once, soft and inevitable. Side 2 has begun, it said, and the cartographer becomes the map. The dust behind me erased my tracks, grain by grain. Ahead, the ranch waited, already knowing where I'd stand, already recording the scream I hadn't yet released. I felt the coordinates burn themselves into the bones of my feet. The compass needles in my pocket finally stopped shaking because north no longer existed. Somewhere in the dark, tomorrow lifted its head and smiled with my own borrowed mouth. I couldn't sit still after the recorder died in my lap. The voice, my own voice, kept looping in my skull like a skipping record. I packed fast, threw a sleeping bag and 2 headlamps into the back seat, and told no one. 4 hours of desert highway stretched ahead, and every mile felt like driving through a throat. That's the only way to describe it. The road swallowed me, wet and warm, then tried to cough me back out. The parcel with the map lay on the passenger seat, but the paper had gone soft, almost skin-like. When I brushed it, the ink bled a little, as if embarrassed to be seen. I flicked on the high beams, and the world ahead sharpened into black glass. That's when the gate first appeared. It hadn't been there a second earlier. I swear it. One moment the road was empty. The next the gate hung in the glare like a bad memory someone decided to hang on a wall. I braked hard enough to smell rubber weep. Steam rose from the hood, or maybe from me. I rolled the window down, and the cold slapped me sober. That's when I saw the handprint, fresh, red, still pulsing heat against the iron. The fingers were too long. joints too many, and the blood smelled of copper pennies left in the sun. I left the engine running because turning it off felt like closing my eyes in deep water. The recorder I'd clipped to the visor clicked on by itself. I never touched it. Static whispered first, then a rhythm. Click, clop, click, clop. Slow and deliberate, circling the car like a lazy carousel. No hooves, no dust, just that sound wearing circles into the night. My headlights dimmed, and the gate brightened as though the metal drank the electricity. I stepped out. Brave or stupid, pick one. The ground under my boots was spongy, almost breathing. I reached to touch the handprint, and the blood was warm, warmer than the night had any right to be. It stuck to my glove like it wanted company. The gate latch hung open, but the chain around it was brand new, padlock gleaming. I could have walked through, but the sound of hooves stopped directly behind me. I turned. Nothing. Only the car, idling, headlights making 2 tunnels in the dark. Yet the recorder picked up snorting, the creak of leather, the jingle of tech. No shapes, no heat signatures, just sound auditioning for a body. I backed toward the driver's door, and the gate creaked without wind. The iron bars bent outward, slowly, politely, like someone holding a door. My own voice leaked from the recorder again, but older, tired. Elias, you already crossed. You just haven't caught up. The words tasted like rust in my mouth, even though I hadn't spoken. I slammed the door, and the sound of hooves scattered. 4 beats becoming 40, then 400, a stampede of invisible animals fleeing something I couldn't name. The gate slammed shut with a clang that made the night bleed silence. I reversed, tires screaming, but the gate followed in the rear view, shrinking yet never vanishing. Every mile I drove, it hovered like a watermark at the edge of sight. The road narrowed, sagebrush clawed at the doors. My headlights began to stutter, and between flashes I saw shapes that weren't there when the lights returned. Antlers tangled in barbed wire, ribs glowing through skinless flanks, eyes that reflected nothing. The recorder kept rolling, picking up my heartbeat and something else. A low, wet chewing right beside my ear, though the passenger seat stayed empty. Halfway to dawn, the engine coughed itself cold. Steam hissed from under the hood like a final confession. I stepped out again, because staying felt worse. The air tasted of iron filings and wet hay. Oh, I walked maybe 20 paces before I noticed the footprints. Mine, but older, edges crumbling as if days had passed since I made them. Behind each print, the sand was darker, soaked. I knelt. It wasn't water. It was the same blood from the gate, still warm, still refusing to clot. The ranch lights appeared then, 3 windows, yellow and steady, on a ridge I swear hadn't existed minutes earlier. No road led to them, just the footprints. I looked back at my car. It was gone. Not stolen, not driven away. Erased, like a word you decide not to write. Only the recorder remained, lying on the dirt, its red light blinking slow as a dying heartbeat. I picked it up. The plastic was cold, but the speaker was warm. It played a single sentence on loop. Side 3 begins, where the map folds itself into a mouth. I felt the coordinates shift again, this time under my tongue, sharp and metallic. The windows on the ridge blinked once, as if winking. Something moved behind them, tall, jointed wrong, silhouetted against a light that flickered between electric and flame. I started walking because standing still felt like sinking. Each step squelched. The blood footprints led uphill, but I couldn't tell if I followed them or they followed me. The recorder clicked, then whispered with my own stolen breath, "You're almost at the hinge." Don't knock. The gate remembers teeth. The wind carried the sound of that gate again, creaking open somewhere behind me, though I'd left it miles ago. Or it left me. I didn't look back. Couldn't. The footprints had stopped forming. Instead, the blood rose in thin streams, braiding together into a single cord that tugged gently at my ankle like a leash. I felt tomorrow's scream climb my throat, patient, rehearsed. Ahead, the windows brightened, and the ridge lifted its lip to show teeth of broken timber. I took the next step, and the ground forgot I was ever anywhere else. The recorder clicked one last time, then spoke in a voice that wasn't mine, wasn't human, wasn't even sound. "Welcome to the hinge, cartographer. The mirror is hungry." And just before the light from those windows touched my face, I heard the gate slam shut. No. Heard it slam open. No. Heard it become a mouth, and I was already inside. The ground beneath my boots felt wrong, like it was remembering a different weight than mine. Each step forward was met with a soft resistance, as though the earth itself was trying to push me back. I could still taste the gate in my mouth, metallic, sour, like chewing on a battery. The voice from the recorder echoed in my skull, not as sound anymore, but as pressure. "Welcome to the hinge, cartographer." I hated that word now. Cartographer. It made me sound like I had a map. I didn't. I had a flashlight that flickered like it was afraid of what it might show me. The ridge ahead had teeth, all right. Jagged pine trunks snapped in half, their splintered ends pointing skyward like accusatory fingers. The wind moved through them with a wet sound, like breath through a throat full of blood. I didn't want to go further. I did anyway. Then I saw it. It was 20 feet up, maybe more. A cow, or what had been one. The hide was peeled back in flaps so precise they looked measured. Not cut, not torn, unzipped. Each flap pointed outward like petals, and if you squinted, if you dared, they formed Orion. Beetlejuice marked the shoulder, Rigel the foot. I didn't want to see it. I couldn't stop seeing it. The air around the carcass shimmered, like heat over asphalt, but the night was cold. Too cold. My breath came out in clouds that didn't rise. They just hung there, like they'd forgotten what to do. I stepped closer, boots crunching on frost that hadn't been there a second ago. The recorder in my pocket clicked on by itself. I hadn't touched it. I swear I hadn't. Thump, thump, thump. A heartbeat. Not mine, not the wind. It came from the cow, from the hollowed-out chest cavity that should have been still. Should have been silent, but no, the sound was wet and steady, like someone clapping with gloves soaked in blood. I lifted the recorder, hands shaking, and held it toward the body like a microphone. "Still warm," the recorder whispered. Not me, not my voice. Still inside. I backed away. 1 step, 2. The heartbeat didn't fade. It got louder. Like it was crawling toward me through the air. I looked up again and saw the flaps twitch. Not wind, not gravity, just response, like the stars were adjusting their gaze. I don't remember falling. One moment I was standing, the next I was on my knees in the dirt, staring up at the suspended thing like it was a cathedral. My mouth tasted like pennies. My ears rang with that heartbeat. I laughed, just once, because what else do you do when the world stops pretending? The recorder clicked again. This time, it played something back. Not words. A sound. A wet, dragging sound. Like skin being pulled across gravel. Like something being turned inside out. I looked down at my hands. They were clean. Too clean. No dirt under the nails. No blood. Just smooth. Like they'd been wiped. Then I saw the tracks. Not mine. Not animal. They started beneath the cow and spiraled outward, in perfect Fibonacci arcs, each step deeper than the last. They didn't touch the ground. They hovered just above it, like the thing that made them had no weight. I followed them, without meaning to. My feet moved on their own. They led me past the clearing, past the ridge, into a grove where the trees leaned inward like conspirators. The heartbeat was still there, but now it echoed from all directions, from the bark, from the air, from inside my own chest. I pressed the recorder to my sternum and hit play. Thump, thump, thump. Not the cow, me, my heartbeat, but wrong, slower, reversed, like it was being played backward through a throat full of static. I turned to run. I didn't. Instead, I stepped into the grove. The heartbeat grew quiet. Not gone, just waiting. The trees parted ahead of me, revealing a second clearing, smaller, darker, and in the center, something knelt. Not a cow, not a man, something else. It looked up at me with no face. Just a reflection, just my face, but wrong, like it had been peeled off and worn inside out. The recorder clicked again, once, twice. Then a voice, not mine, not the thing's, spoke from the speaker like it was reading from a script I hadn't written yet. Chapter 6 begins now. Don't look away. I didn't. I couldn't. Because the thing was already walking toward me, and every step it took erased one of mine behind it. The thing that wore my face took another step, and the grass behind it withered in a perfect circle, like frost burning backwards. I felt the chill crawl up my shins, even though the night was warm. My recorder kept clicking, slower now, as if the batteries were bleeding out. I backed away, one pace, two, and the heartbeat I'd been chasing since the ridge started thumping louder, but not from the creature, from the ground, from something buried beneath the windmill that hadn't been there yesterday. Clears throat. Yeah, I know how that sounds. Welcome to Skinwalker Ranch. The collapsed windmill looked ancient, all snapped ribs and canvas flapping like skin. Each gust made it moan. I smelled rusted iron and something sweeter, like canned peaches left too long in the sun. The heartbeat pulsed through the soles of my boots, steady, patient. It guided me to a mound of splintered planks where the mill's stone base had cracked open like a broken tooth. Under the rubble, a rusted iron ring, flush with the dirt. Oh, of course there was a hatch, because apparently I'm the kind of idiot who opens doors that should stay welded shut. I hauled the ring up with both hands. It screamed like it hadn't moved since statehood. Stale air rushed out, carrying dust and a chorus of whispers so soft they felt like memories I'd never made. I hesitated, because self-preservation is still a thing, right? But the recorder clicked again, just once, like a director cueing the talent. Down I went. The ladder was wood, warped, rungs sagging under my weight like damp cardboard. 12 steps. I counted because numbers are the last anchor when reality decides to unrest. The cellar beneath wasn't large, 20 feet square maybe, but the shelves went on forever. I mean that literally. The far wall curved away into darkness that swallowed my flashlight beam. Mason jars lined every shelf, hundreds of them, filled with liquid so black it shone. If you've never seen light reflect off pure dark, imagine a mirror made of absence. Each jar had a paper label. I lifted one close enough to read without touching glass. The ink was fresh, still bleeding. Megan, episode 92. The liquid inside rippled, as though something just turned over. A voice, my voice, but softer, younger, spoke from the jar. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My own intro line, from a video I hadn't uploaded yet. I stepped sideways. Another jar. Dale, live stream. Another, Sarah, reaction. The names kept scrolling. Credits for an audience that didn't know they were already canned. I felt my stomach flip. These weren't viewers. They were harvested listens, like fruit preserved in midnight brine. The algorithm had teeth after all. At eye level, one jar stood apart. The glass was empty, spotless, but the label read Elias. No episode number, no date. Just my name. The lid was off, waiting. Like someone stepped out for a smoke and would be right back. I reached for it, don't ask why. Maybe the same reason moths flirt with bug zappers, and the cellar lights, all of them, died. Darkness pressed against my face like wet cloth. Then the whispers returned, louder, overlapping. 1,000 voices reciting subscriber counts, watch times, retention graphs. I backed up, jar still in hand, and my heel struck something soft. A bundle on the floor. I knelt, fingers trembling, and felt canvas. My own backpack, the one I'd left in the truck at the gate. Inside, the recorder, still warm, still clicking. But the LED screen now showed negative numbers, ticking backward toward 0. Each tick felt like a tooth pulled. The heartbeat thundered directly beneath me. I pressed my palm to the dirt floor, and it pulsed up through my wrist like a second heart, trying to sink. The empty jar grew heavy in my other hand, as if filling itself with every second the counter lost. I lifted it to my ear and heard nothing. No, that's wrong. I heard the absence of everything. a silence so complete it had weight. And in that void, my own voice spoke, not from the recorder, not from the jar, but from inside my skull, like a preloaded ad. When the counter hits 0, the story ends, unless the narrator becomes the listener. I looked up. The shelves had moved. The endless corridor of jars now formed a circle around me, lids unscrewing themselves in perfect synchrony. The liquid night began to rise, spilling over edges without ever touching the floor, hanging in the air like ink suspended in zero gravity. My label fluttered loose from the empty jar and landed face up at my feet. The name had changed. It now read Chapter 7. The recorder gave one final click, and the screen went black. In that silence, I heard footsteps above, slow, deliberate, crossing the planks of the windmill. Not the faceless thing from the field, something heavier, something that dragged, something that knew I was almost out of chapters. The hatch above my head slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid, and the heartbeat beneath my feet skipped, just once, like a hiccup, like a laugh, and then it started counting up again, from 1. I stood in the root cellar with the heartbeat under the floorboards ticking like a slow bomb, and the only thing I could think to do was pick up the mason jar Elias had left on the workbench. It looked empty, just dusty glass and a lid rusted the color of dried blood, but when my fingers closed around it, the air folded wrong, like someone had creased the room. The jar was weightless, yet my reflection stayed behind inside it, palms pressed to the inner curve, mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear. I tried to drop the thing, but my hand was glued by cold sweat. The reflection, my reflection, began pounding, knuckles smearing red, as if the glass were painted with the inside of a vein. It looked older than me, though. 10 years, maybe 20, gray at the temples. Eyes ringed with nights I hadn't lived yet. The reel-to-reel on the shelf sputtered to life without warning, tape unspooling in reverse. The child's voice we'd recorded earlier now cracked and deepened, syllables tumbling backward until they weren't childlike at all. Clear's throat. The voice was mine again, but worn, gravelly, pleading. Elias, go home. Elias, you're hurting us. Each word pulled the cellar walls a millimeter closer until the beams creaked like ribs taking a breath. I smelled pennies and wet earth. A thick drop struck the recorder, then another. I looked up, and the ceiling bled. Not dripped, bled. A slow curtain of scarlet welled from the pine planks, running in perfect vertical lines, as if the wood itself were skin slit with razors. The blood hissed when it touched the spinning reels, and the motor coughed once, twice, then died in a greasy puff of smoke. Silence fell heavier than any sound I'd ever heard. The heartbeat beneath the floor stopped mid-beat, leaving my own chest echoing the absence. I waited for the next thump. Nothing. Just the jar in my hand, the reflection now motionless, staring with a pity so deep it scraped bone. Then the silence cracked open inside me. A single pulse, low and wet, answered from the center of my sternum. I felt the rhythm shift, like a radio finding the wrong station. 1 beat. Pause. 2 beats. The floor no longer kept time. I did. My ribs vibrated with borrowed blood. I pressed my free hand to my chest, and the jar slipped, but instead of shattering, it hovered, spinning lazily, lid unscrewing itself. The older me inside smiled, no teeth, only gums black as cellar dirt, and reached out. A fingertip brushed the inner glass, and a frost line raced across the surface, writing words backward, Leave. I backed toward the stairs, but the wooden treads had turned soft, pulpy, as though soaked for decades. My boots sank ankle deep, and something warm closed around them, tugging like a throat swallowing. I laughed because terror needed an exit, and that was the only one left. The heartbeat in my chest skipped again, and when it resumed, it carried a second rhythm underneath, like 2 drummers playing slightly out of sync. One of them, I realized, wasn't mine. I tore 1 foot free with a sound like ripping Velcro, then the other, and bolted up the stairs. The hatch at the top refused to budge. I threw my shoulder against it, once, twice, but it felt nailed from the outside by fingers stronger than nails. The heartbeat sped up, 120, 130, hummingbird frantic, and with every thud the cellar stretched taller, the bulb receding until it was a star I couldn't reach. The jar clattered up the steps after me, rolling without touching wood, lid now fully off. The older me crawled out head first, shoulders folding like paper, then unfolded on the landing with a wet snap. He didn't blink. His eyes were the same muddy green, but filmed over, as if he'd been underwater since the day I was born. He opened his mouth, and the voice that came out was the tape in forward motion again, childlike and terrified. "Don't let me out," he whispered, except the lips didn't match, like a badly dubbed film. I laughed again because what else do you do when the nightmare quotes your own bedtime prayers backward? My chest hammered double time now, and I tasted iron at the back of my tongue. Behind him, the blood from the ceiling gathered into a single, suspended globe, a red sun trapped between floor and roof. It pulsed once, perfectly synchronized with the heartbeat inside me, then burst. The spray painted the walls in arterial arcs, spelling the same word, Leave, again and again, each letter fatter than the last, until the word became a door. A real door, standing where no door had ever been, frame weeping red sap. The knob turned before I could reach for it. The older me stepped aside, courteous as a maitre d', and bowed. When he straightened, his face cracked along the same fault lines as the cellar ceiling, leaking the same dark syrup. "After you," he said, voice layered, half child, half grave. The heartbeat inside me paused, waiting for my answer. I felt the next pulse gathering like a storm, and I knew. I knew with a certainty that tasted like pennies. If I crossed that threshold, the beat would stay with me forever, loud enough to drown every other sound I would ever love. The knob was warm, sticky. I wrapped my fingers around it. Behind the door, something dragged its weight across planks, slow, deliberate, heavier than the windmill steps from earlier. Not the faceless thing. Something that had waited long enough to learn my name. The heartbeat thumped again, impatient, and the door eased open a crack, exhaling a breath of winter apples and slaughterhouse iron. I didn't step through. Not yet. I just stood there with my older self bleeding beside me, listening to the thing on the other side whisper the next chapter in a voice that sounded exactly like my mother's. "Elias, sweetheart, you're home." The heartbeat counted down from 5, and I couldn't tell if it was warning me or inviting me. The heartbeat counted down to 1 and then stopped. Just stopped. No echo, no fade. The door in front of me hung open like a mouth that had forgotten how to close, and the smell of winter apples curdled into something copper sweet. I didn't step through. I didn't have to. The ranch exhaled me. I found myself outside, gravel crunching under my boots, the night air so cold it felt like breathing glass shards. The pickup sat 20 yards away, door yawning open, radio hissing white static. I don't remember climbing out. I don't even remember deciding to. The ranch just placed me there, like a chess piece nudged by an invisible hand. Then I saw them. Across the flat, maybe 100 paces off, shapes moved. Not walked, shambled. Human outlines draped in heavy hides that flapped like wet curtains. Cowhides, still dripping, the hair matted with something darker than dew. The smell hit next. Raw meat left in the sun, mixed with the sour tang of old milk. My stomach flipped, but my feet stayed rooted. They moved in single file, slow and deliberate, heading for the base of the mesa that rose like a broken tooth against the stars. 9 of them, or 10. Hard to count when they kept shifting, shoulders rolling under the hides, as though the skins hadn't finished dying yet. Yeah, that's the kind of math you do out here. How many nightmares can you tally before your brain taps out? I should have run. Instead, I followed. The ground between us felt stretched, like the acreage itself was rubber banding, keeping me just close enough to see details I didn't want. The hides weren't tied or sewn. They clung, fused to whatever walked beneath. No hands, no feet, just blunt stumps that somehow kept balance. And the heads? No faces. Only mirrors. Each figure bore a flat, oval plate where a face should be, polished to impossible silver. They caught the starlight and threw it back in fractured shards, so for a heartbeat I saw the Milky Way chopped into ribbons across 10 walking skulls. My own reflection danced in every slice, Eyes wide, mouth open, stupid kid trespassing on something older than names. One of them paused, third from the front. It turned, slow as a sundial, and the mirror face swung toward me. I braced for my own terrified expression. Maybe a final snapshot before the herd decided I didn't belong. Instead, the reflection shifted. I wasn't standing on the flats anymore. I was inside my pickup, headlights carving a tunnel of light down the county road, steering wheel steady under relaxed fingers, radio playing some old country tune I hated. I looked, calm, homebound, safe. Behind the wheel, my future self yawned, scratched at stubble, and flicked the high beams. Not a drop of blood, no haunted acreage in the rear view. Just the quiet hum of tires and the promise of a mattress I'd left that morning. The mirror showed tomorrow. A tomorrow where I never stopped, never opened that door, never heard my mother's voice calling from the other side. The image was so vivid, I felt the seatbelt cross my chest, smelled the pine tree air freshener dangling from the mirror. Then the tape deck in my pocket clicked. Not the truck's, my pocket. The micro cassette I'd pulled from the Root Cellar, the one labeled Side A in my own shaking scrawl. It had been silent since sundown, but now the plastic tab snapped over with a plastic pop that echoed like a gunshot across the flats. Side B. The herd froze. Every mirror face swiveled toward the sound. The reflection of my peaceful drive shattered, replaced by something darker, my own mouth opening in a scream I hadn't voiced yet. I backed up a step. Gravel rolled under my heel. The figures didn't move, but the hides started to slip, revealing skin the color of old parchment stretched over angles that weren't quite human. Joints hinged backward, elbows bending like spider legs. One lifted an arm, and the mirror tilted, flashing the mesa's silhouette inside itself. There was a door carved into the rock. Same proportions as the one in the cellar, same iron scent leaking from the cracks, only this one stood wide open, and something inside pulsed with the same heartbeat I'd heard in my own chest. The tape hissed louder, spooling thin black ribbon into the wind. Words crawled out, not mine, not anyone's. Return the hide. Return the hide. Return the hide. Over and over, like a skipping record made of teeth. I looked down. My jacket sleeve was wet. I hadn't noticed. Dark streaks soaked the fabric, same color as the dripping hides. When had I touched them? When had they touched me? The herd took a step in perfect unison. The mirrors flashed again, and this time I saw my mother's face staring back. Not reflected, imprisoned. Her mouth moved, but the tape voice drowned her out. She pressed a hand against the glass, and I swear I felt the print of her palm on my own cheek, cold as cellar stone. The mesa door throbbed, and the heartbeat synced with the tape's rhythm. One thump per syllable. Return the hide. My legs wanted to bolt, but the ranch had other plans. The gravel softened underfoot, turning to something slick and warm. Guess the ground could bleed too. A wind rose, carrying the smell of apples gone rotten. The herd parted, forming a corridor straight to the mesa. At the far end, the door waited. Inside, something moved, tall, thin, wearing my face like a borrowed mask. It lifted a hand, curling one finger. Come here, Elias. Come home. The tape snapped again, spitting out the last ribbon. Silence fell so hard my ears rang. Then, from the empty cassette, a new voice, my own, older, cracked with exhaustion. Don't open the door. Don't open the... Click. Static. The herd stepped forward. I stepped back. And somewhere behind me, another door. This one metal, truck door familiar, slammed shut on its own. The engine turned over, headlights flaring. The driver's seat was empty, wheel spinning slow, like something invisible had just taken the wheel. I looked at the mesa, then at the truck. 2 doors. One promise of safety, one promise of answers. Both of them lies, probably. But the hides were sliding off faster now, and the mirrors were cracking, and my mother's reflection was bleeding from the eyes. The herd waited, the truck idled, and the heartbeat counted down again. 4, 3, 2, 1. The count reached 1 and the world snapped, not ended, but reversed, like a vinyl record flipped to its secret B-side. The truck vanished first, engine cough, headlights dying mid-blink, leaving me alone in a wind that tasted of copper and wet dust. My boots sank into sand so fine it poured between the laces like hourglass grief. Above me, the mesa had folded itself into a black wave, frozen, just before it could crash. I could still hear the herd breathing, but the sound came from inside my own chest now, a second heart galloping behind my ribs. I fumbled for my phone. Instinct is useless as a match in rain. The screen lit before I touched it. A podcast was already playing. My podcast, the one I'd never recorded. The waveform pulsed red. Side B, the title read, and underneath, the listener's heartbeat. Cute. I raised the speaker to my ear and nearly dropped it. The thud I heard was mine. Lub dub, lub dub. Only magnified, stretched, slathered in reverb, until each beat sounded like a basement door being kicked open from the inside. Distant rotors chopped through the bass line. Helicopters, at least 3, maybe 5, circling somewhere far above. The rotors synced with my pulse so perfectly, I felt the blades sweep through my arteries. Then came the comments. They scrolled across the screen in that familiar live chat waterfall, usernames I didn't recognize, timestamps that hadn't happened yet. But the letters didn't stay digital. They fell out of the phone like sand and landed on the ground in front of me, etched deep, as if a fingernail had dragged through cement. First line read, Elias, turn around. Second, the mirrors are thirsty. Third, do not trust the dust. The words kept coming, piling up around my boots until I stood in a shallow trench of pleas and warnings and jokes I didn't understand. Every time I blinked, more appeared, the dust carving itself faster than I could read. I tried stepping back. The ground simply extended the trench beneath me, obedient, hungry. I'm not live, I told the air. This is pre-recorded. But the podcast answered in my own voice, tinny and intimate. Tell that to the rotors, Eli. They're above wherever you're listening right now. The helicopters felt so close I ducked, though the sky stayed empty except for those slow, deliberate beams sweeping the salt. I tasted aviation fuel on the back of my tongue. My heartbeat, no, the recording of it, began to skip, a scratched record hiccup. Each skip yanked a breath from my lungs like someone pulling a drawstring. I knelt, fingers tracing the newest line in the dust. The ranch is a mirror that bleeds back. The letters were warm. I looked at my reflection in the polished surface of my phone and saw, for just a moment, not my face, but the mesas, its cliff faces wrinkled like skin, its caves dark as pupils. The reflection blinked when I didn't. I dropped the phone. It landed face up, screen cracked into a spiderweb that matched the sky's violet veins. From the fissure, thin red liquid seeped, first a bead, then a rivulet, matching the rhythm of the rotors, matching the pulse in my ears. The dust drank it greedily, and every sip spelled another word. Hide. Too late. The heartbeat recording slowed to a crawl, each thud now a funeral drum. The helicopters answered with a lower pitch, circling tighter, as though reeling me in on an invisible winch. I felt my own heart try to match their lazy tempo, and the mismatch hurt, a cramp behind the sternum. The dust trench deepened, walls rose to my knees, my waist. I was standing in a grave made of audience commentary. A new message arrived, carved in frantic capitals. Side B plays what you most want to forget. I tasted iron. The letters were right. A memory surfaced unbidden. My mother's kitchen, the night she told me monsters wore human skins like winter coats. She'd whispered it while peeling potatoes, never looking up. I'd laughed. Now the podcast replayed that laugh, warped, reversed, turned into the lowing of cattle that walk on 2 legs. The trench circled me in a perfect spiral, the same shape as the old reel-to-reel tapes my father kept labeled, "Do not duplicate." Those tapes had recorded nothing but wind, he claimed. Wind and a heartbeat not his own. I finally understood. Side B wasn't a recording of my pulse. It was a recording of the ranch listening to me, patiently, for 30 years. Every skipped heartbeat, every guilty laugh, every dream where I ran from something wearing my own face, cataloged, remastered, pressed into this moment. The rotors dipped lower. downdraft blasting grit into my eyes. The dust wall reached my shoulders. I could still move my arms, barely. I reached for the cracked phone, intending to smash it, end the feed, cut the tether, but the screen lit one last time, displaying a single new comment. It wasn't etched into the ground. It hovered in the air between me and the lens, glowing, written in my mother's handwriting. "The truck door is still open, darling. Drive before the mirrors finish drinking." I looked up. Out on the flat, headlights flared again, impossibly far, yet close enough to touch. The engine coughed awake. No driver. The steering wheel spun, beckoning. Behind me, the spiral trench began to close, dust flowing inward like water down a drain. The helicopters tilted, ready to follow. Choice, again. Always choice. My pulse synced with the idle of that empty truck, a duet of dying machinery. I took one step toward the lights. The podcast volume dropped to a whisper only I could hear. If you leave, the recording ends. If you stay, the listener becomes the loop. The dust brushed my ankles, gentle as a bedtime story. I felt the trench seal, felt the helicopter's downdraft become a kiss of wind. I reached for the driver's side handle, already knowing it would be burning hot. The heartbeat counted down again. 4, 3, 2. My fingers stuck to the metal like burnt paper. The truck handle hissed, skin sizzling against the chrome, yet I couldn't pull away. 4 beats left, 3, 2, and then the heartbeat stopped. Not faded, stopped. The silence was so sudden, I felt my own heart trip, stumble, restart in panic. The headlights winked out. The engine coughed once, died. In the dark, the mesa itself spoke. Not with words, but with the sound of tearing cloth magnified to a roar. A fissure yawned open at the base of the ridge, a vertical mouth lined with glassy black stone. The air smelled of wet iron and fresh-turned soil, as though the planet itself had sliced its own palm. I stepped toward the wound, boots crunching on crystalline gravel. Every footfall echoed back in me, multiplied, like a crowd walking just behind my shoulder. They're all me, every version that ever chose wrong. The fissure widened, inviting. A corridor, straight and narrow, descended into the earth. The walls were obsidian so pure, they drank the starlight and spat it back as ghosts. My reflection stared from every surface, but never the same age. Here I was 12, gap-toothed and sunburned, clutching a cassette labeled Mom. There I was 40, beard streaked with gray. Same cassette, label now blank. Vanity is a loop too, apparently. I walked. The corridor hummed, a low thrum like a throat clearing itself. With each step, the reflections peeled further apart. One of me limped, another bled from the ear. Another's eyes were just empty sockets, lit from inside by static. I felt the ground tilt, gentle but undeniable, pulling me forward the way a story pulls a listener past midnight. My boots left no prints. The glass swallowed them like gossip. Halfway down, the air grew warm, then hot, then feverish. The obsidian sweated, droplets rolling down like tears on a statue. I reached out to steady myself, and my palm sank wrist deep into the wall. It wasn't stone anymore. It was flesh, warm, pliant, with the give of a healing scar. The surface pulsed beneath my fingers, heartbeat matching the one I'd lost outside. I yanked my hand back, but the skin came with it, stretching like taffy before snapping back with a wet kiss. A single drop of blood, mine, I think, hung in the air, suspended, then was sucked into the wall as payment. At the far end, the corridor widened into a circular chamber, domed and smooth. Light came from nowhere and everywhere, a dim violet that made my teeth ache. In the center stood a figure, same height, same jacket fraying at the cuffs. But older, much older. His beard reached his sternum, braided with tiny bones. The cassette in his hand was no longer transparent plastic. It had grown, thick as a brick, the reels inside spinning slow as planets. Fresh label, scrawled in what looked like fingernail scratches. Play me before you die. He smiled, my crooked canine, my nervous tick of the left eye, and raised the cassette like a toast. Ha ha ha. The sound that came out of him wasn't laughter, though. It was the exact pitch of the podcast static, tuned to a lullaby. I took one step closer, and the reflections on the walls snapped into perfect focus. Every single Elias, all ages, all injuries, all wearing that same exhausted grin. A choir of me, waiting. The older me lifted his free hand to his cheek, fingernails dug under the edge of his skin. Not skin, I realized, but a mask as thin as onion paper. With a sound like Velcro parting, he peeled it away in one smooth motion. No blood, no muscle. Beneath was raw earth, dark and crumbly, laced with white roots that wriggled like blind worms. A face made of dirt. The roots reached toward me, questing. I tasted soil on my tongue, though my mouth was shut. His voice, my voice, but deeper, seasoned with centuries of canyon wind, echoed from every wall. You kept the tape running, kid. Good. Now the listener gets to speak. He extended the cassette. The reels inside had stopped. A single strip of magnetic ribbon hung out, fluttering though there was no breeze. At its tip, a droplet of something thick and metallic swelled, fell, vanished before it hit the ground. I reached out. My fingertips brushed the ribbon, and the chamber shuddered. The reflections stepped forward, synchronized, pressing against the glassy walls until the surface bowed outward, like overfilled balloons. Their mouths opened, not in scream, but in recitation. I heard my own diary, the one I burned at 16. I heard the lie I told my father the night he left. I heard the first time I ever pressed record, age 9, saying, "Testing, testing, is anybody out there?" All at once, 1,000 private shames, broadcast in quadraphonic shame. The older me leaned closer. His breath smelled of petrichor and copper. "Skin listens better than ears," he whispered. "Every inch of you is recording, even the parts you forgot." He tapped the cassette against my sternum. It stuck there, cold, then warm, then searing. I felt gears turning under my ribs, winding something tight. The domed ceiling cracked, a single hairline fracture racing outward like lightning frozen mid-flash. Through the split, red light poured in, thick as syrup. The roots in his dirt face writhed, excited. He placed the peeled skin mask over my own face, not aggressively, almost gentle, like a mother adjusting a child's hood. It settled, fused, became my skin again, yet heavier, as though it carried every mistake I'd ever made. I couldn't breathe, my mouth filled with the taste of cassette ribbon and dust. He stepped back, arms wide, surrendering the stage. The chamber began to rotate, not the floor, but the space itself, spinning like a dial on an old radio. The reflections blurred into streaks of color, then into sound, then into pure pressure against my eardrums. I felt the reel inside my chest click, engage, start to play. But it wasn't my heartbeat I heard. It was yours. Yes, listener. The one pressing play right now. The tape pulled your pulse through the headphones, through the screen, through whatever skin separates story from skin. I could feel it sinking, aligning, the way two clocks in the same room eventually ticked together. The older me bowed, theatrical. Your turn to bleed back, he said, and the chamber door, the wound in the mesa, began to seal, stone grinding like teeth. I lunged, but the cassette anchored me, tethered by the ribbon that now stretched invisible miles to wherever you are. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed everything was my own reflection in the closing slit, eyes wide, mouth open, skin already flaking away to reveal something darker beneath, and then the slit shut with a sound like a tape snapping at the end of its spool. The heartbeat, your heartbeat, echoes inside my ribs now, steady, patient, waiting for chapter 11. I was falling upward, or sideways, or maybe inward. The darkness peeled itself apart like old wallpaper, and the cassette ribbon that had lashed me to you pulled taut, vibrating with every beat of your pulse. I didn't hit ground so much as the ground folded around me, a velvet blackness that hushed my scream and turned it into a sigh. When the black finally let go, I was kneeling inside something vast, something that breathed in perfect sync with the thudding in my chest. It looked like the inside of a geode, only grown monstrous. Jagged mirrors, thousands of them, lined every curve of the cavern, their faces angled so that none of them showed me my own image. Instead, each pane revealed the ranch, but wrong, always wrong. In one, the cottonwoods bent backward, leaves dripping upward into a bruised sky. In another, the gate hung open on hinges made of vertebrae. And in a third, something wearing my coat stood at the fence, waving with a hand that had too many thumbs. I reached toward the nearest shard, and the moment my fingertip brushed its surface, every reflection flickered to a single scene. Me, here, now, staring into the glass. But behind my shoulder, crowding the edges of every frame, were faces. Millions of them, layered like mica, all watching. Some were familiar, the ones who'd messaged after Chapter 2 saying they'd heard footsteps in their living rooms. Others were strangers, eyes wide, earbuds glowing little blue halos in the dark. I realized then that the ranch wasn't a place at all. It was a mirror, stitched from disbelief, each shard cut from the moment someone muttered, "That can't be real," and still hit play anyway. A low hum rose, the sound of old tape spooling. The mirrored walls flexed, bending closer, and the air tasted metallic, like blood you've held in your mouth too long. My reflection opened its mouth, but the voice that came out wasn't mine. It was layered, yours, mine, the static of a million headphones. "You came for answers," it said, "but answers are just reflections with the lights turned off." Behind the words, I heard the cattle from Chapter 8, their hooves clicking like typewriter keys, spelling out my name, one letter at a time. I stumbled back. The ribbon tied to my sternum tugged harder, urging me toward the center of the chamber, where a single shard stood taller than the rest, wider, its surface rippling like water deciding whether to stay liquid. This one showed nothing of the ranch. Instead, it showed your room, wherever you are, lit by the glow of whatever screen you're holding. I could see the outline of your shoulders, the faint fog of your breath on cold glass. And between us, in that impossible space between speaker and listener, the ribbon pulsed, a red vein pumping borrowed blood. "Touch it," the layered voice urged, softer now, almost tender. "See what you look like when nobody's watching." I didn't want to. But the ribbon shortened, inch by inch, reeling me closer until my palm flattened against the cool glass. The surface parted around my hand like it was welcoming me home. Cold shot up my arm, and the reflection shivered. Every shard flashed white, then black, then settled on a new scene, the ranch at dawn. But the sky was made of cassette tape, clouds spooled and tangled, and the sun was a red wreck light blinking on and off. In that stuttering light, the fences weren't fences, they were ribs. The barn wasn't a barn. It was a throat. And the soil moved with the slow peristalsis of something swallowing. I tried to pull away, but the glass held my hand like a promise it never intended to keep. The layered voice whispered again, this time only in my left ear, intimate, like a secret passed in a dark theater. "You thought the ranch was haunted, Elias. But you're the haunting. We all are. Every time you press play, you feed it another acre of yourself." The red light on the horizon blinked faster. Each pulse matched the thud in my ribs, your heartbeat syncing with mine, until I couldn't tell whose blood was whose. I felt skin slough from my fingers, not painful, just inevitable, like snow melting when no one's looking. Underneath, the flesh was mirrored, reflecting the cavern, reflecting the ranch, reflecting you. And the worst part? I understood. The ranch wasn't bleeding. We were. It just collected the runoff. The chamber began to rotate, slow as a minute hand. Every shard slid past me like subway windows, each one showing a different listener falling asleep to the sound of my voice, each one leaving a smear of frost on the glass. I caught glimpses. Someone in a dorm room, headphones on, roommate snoring like a chainsaw. Someone driving midnight highways, dashboard lights painting their knuckles green. Someone else, alone, clutching a childhood stuffed animal they never admitted still owning. All of us stitched together by a ribbon of magnetic tape that had no beginning and no end. The tall shard tugged harder. My arm sank deeper, past the elbow now, and the cold turned to warmth, the warmth to pressure, the pressure to a hum that tasted like copper pennies. I felt the geode inhale, somewhere far above or below. The slit in the mesa was opening again, but this time it wasn't a door, it was a mouth, and it was hungry for the next chapter. Just as the glass reached my shoulder, the layered voice fractured into individual whispers, each one a listener, saying my name in their own accent, their own fear. "Elias, Elias, Elias, Elias." The sound layered into a chorus, and the red light blinked one final time before going dark. I couldn't tell if I was being pulled through or if the mirror was pulling itself into me. Either way, I felt the ribbon tighten, a noose made of story and static. And somewhere beyond the glass, the next chamber waited, long, low, and lined with shelves of cassette cases labeled in handwriting I almost recognized. But before I could read the first spine, the glass sealed behind me, cutting the chorus to a single heartbeat. Yours. And that's when I realized, Chapter 12 has already started recording. It's just waiting for you to press play. The glass sealed behind me with a wet pop, and for one heartbeat the silence was so total, I thought I'd gone deaf. Then the walls began to breathe. Not metaphor. They actually inhaled, ribs of mirror flexing outward like lungs, and the cold reflection of my own face slid away beneath a sudden sheen of pink. The glass had turned to flesh, translucent, veined, slick, and it pulsed in time with the sound I'd mistaken for my own heart. It wasn't mine. It was the ranch, listening through every listener who ever pressed play. I reached for the recorder, meaning to hit stop, to end whatever transmission I'd become, but my thumb froze mid-motion because the button was already down. It had never been up. The red light glared like a single lidless eye, and from its tiny speaker came the sound of this very second, my gasp, the squelch of the walls, the soft weeping of tape unspooling inside my own chest. The machine wasn't recording me. I was recording it. Or maybe we were the same device now, a loop of meat and memory nobody manufactured but everybody owns. The corridor narrowed with each pulse, and the wet mirrors pressed closer until my shoulders brushed them. Warm. They were fever warm, and where skin met flesh mirror, a numbness spread, the way Novocaine creeps through gum. I wanted to pull away, but the numbness felt like forgetting, like the relief of finally setting down something too heavy to carry. I almost surrendered to it. Almost. Then the walls spoke. Not in words, but in doubt. They replayed every time I'd whispered, "This can't be real." Every moment belief cracked and leaked. The ranch wasn't feeding on fear. Fear is loud and obvious. It dined on the hush between certainty and question, that microscopic hesitation when you decide maybe nightmares bleed, and it licks the wound clean. A low tearing sound rose from beneath my boots, the noise of fabric ripping along a seam. I looked down. The floor, once smooth glass, now showed a perfect incision running between my feet, a zipper of darkness unzipping itself. The edges peeled back like lips parting for a secret. Cold air breathed out, smelling of iron and old tape hiss. Something glinted inside. A strip of magnetic ribbon, miles long, coated in red, not oxide, but something wetter. It slithered upward, threading around my ankles, gentle as a mother's hands, yet firm as restraints. I tried to step back. The tape tugged. Somewhere far behind me, the corridor collapsed into teeth, molars of mirror grinding shut. No retreat. Forward, then. I lowered one foot into the incision, and the ranch sighed, a satisfied post-meal sound. My boot sank through warm red dark until I felt ground again, but different ground, softer, forgiving, like walking on tongue. I didn't want to imagine whose. The tape coiled higher, up my calves, tickling the backs of my knees with recorded whispers. Each loop played a voice I knew. My mother calling me home for dinner, an old friend laughing at a joke I'd forgotten, the first person who ever told me a scary story. They were all here, archived in arterial magnetic memory. I realized the ranch hadn't stolen these moments. We'd fed them to it willingly. Every time we said, "Listen to this," the corridor ended, not with a door, but with an amphitheater of flesh. Curved walls rose like the inside of a gigantic ear, every ridge and whirl catching echoes and throwing them back distorted. In the center hovered the recorder, no longer plastic and metal, but a beating heart of circuits and valves. Red light throbbed in rhythm with my pulse, though I could no longer tell which of us was keeping time. Around it floated hundreds, no, thousands of cassette shells, their spines blank now, labels dissolved into smears. They orbited the heart like memories circling a trauma. I walked closer. Each step squelched. The incision beneath me had become a tunnel, and somewhere down its wet throat, I heard other footsteps echoing mine. Not behind me, below. Listeners, walking in their own incisions, feeling the same tape wrap their ankles. I understood with the clarity of a scream held in. Every play button pressed tonight opened another identical wound. The ranch was a mirror, yes, but worse. It was a scalpel, and we'd lined up to be flayed by our own curiosity. The heart recorder spoke. No voice, just vibration traveling through my bones. It said, doubt again. So I did. I pictured the skeptic I used to be, the one who laughed at campfire tales. That laugh replayed now, warped, stretched until it sounded like a siren. The heart brightened, drinking it in. I felt lighter, emptier, as though the ranch were siphoning the weight of every question I'd ever asked. And still the tape climbed, past my waist, around my ribs, a corset of borrowed memories squeezing tighter. A final loop of ribbon reached my throat, not to choke, but to measure. It pressed against my larynx like a doctor checking pulse. I felt words forming without my permission, words I hadn't spoken yet. I believe this story is still recording. The heart skipped, delighted. Around me, the cassette shells snapped open like jaws, each revealing a tiny mirror inside. Every mirror showed me from the perspective of someone listening right now. Someone in their car, someone wearing headphones in the dark, someone who paused the video to check the shadows behind them. I was everywhere, multiplied, reflected in eyes I couldn't see, but could feel blinking. The incision underfoot widened, inviting me to lie down, to become the final trek. I resisted, but resistance tastes like doubt, and the ranch was starving. The tape tightened, gentle, almost loving. I leaned closer to the heart recorder, close enough to smell the hot circuitry of my own voice. One more step and I'd be inside, archived. A story that plays itself every time someone wonders if it's real. But before I could move, the heart stuttered. Not a malfunction, a question. A single heartbeat skipped, and in that skipped space, I heard something new. Not my down, not yours, but the ranch's. For the first time, the mirror hesitated. It felt me listening back. The tape loosened. The amphitheater walls trembled like skin sensing a needle. Somewhere far below, in every incision across every listener's floor, the same hesitation rippled. We were no longer the meal. We were the scalpel. The heart dimmed, flickering between red and black. I reached out, not to stop it, but to press record. My finger hovered. One touch, and the loop breaks, or tightens forever. The ribbon brushed my wrist, a lover's final caress, and whispered a title I hadn't heard yet, a title that will only exist if I press down. Around me, the mirrors blinked out one by one, leaving the dark. I felt the ranch inhale, waiting for my verdict. I smiled. Couldn't help it, because the scariest part isn't what happens when I decide. It's that you're already holding the button. And the incision beneath you just sighed. I pressed it. The button sank like a rotten tooth, and the recorder's tiny red eye flared to life. Not recording. Bleeding. The hiss that had been background static thickened, curdled, until it became a low, wet roar. The sound of daylight being torn open. I should have felt the plastic under my thumb, but instead I felt skin, warm and pulsing, as if the device had grown a throat. The sky answered. One moment it was afternoon, the next the sun coughed once, spat a ribbon of black across the blue, and simply folded in on itself like a burning photograph. No dusk, no stars, just a bruised twilight that hung there, swollen and permanent, the color of a fresh hematoma. I tasted metal on my tongue, then realized the air itself was bleeding iron. Somewhere inside the hiss, words began forming, not spoken, but remembered by the sound itself. My own voice, younger, smaller, chanting the same 3 syllables over and over until they lost all meaning and became pure texture. Elias, Elias. Each repetition tugged at my shoulders, urging me to turn around, even though I already faced the ranch. The mirrors had all gone dark, yet their absence felt brighter than their reflections ever had, like staring into the socket of a pulled tooth and seeing daylight on the other side of the world. The recorder's spools spun faster, the tape thinning, stretching, until it gleamed like spider silk. I expected it to snap. Instead, it liquefied, pouring out of the machine in a ribbon of liquid light that crawled up my wrist and braided itself into the veins beneath my skin. It tickled at first, then burned, then felt like coming home after years of forgetting the address. The land began to ripple. Not earthquake ripple, fold, the way you fold a sheet so the corners kiss. Fence posts leaned inward, not falling, but bowing, greeting me. The barn roof split down the middle and peeled back like lips, revealing a hollow throat lined with hay that looked suspiciously like hair. I tried to step back, but the ground softened, cradling my boots the way memory cradles regret. That was when the child's voice sharpened, not behind me, but inside the bones of my ears. "Welcome home," it said, and I knew, not suspected, knew. It had always been my voice, recorded decades before I was ever born, waiting on a tape that hadn't been manufactured yet. The ranch wasn't showing me a reflection. It was swallowing the mirror and inviting me to sit somewhere behind the glass. I felt the listeners then. You. Each of you a warm pressure at the base of my skull, like thumbs pressing against the story. I wanted to warn you, but warnings need direction, and every compass here points inward. The hiss grew teeth, gnawing the edges of the sky until the bruised light began to drip, slow and thick, onto the fields. Where it landed, the dirt hissed back, steaming up faces I almost recognized. Mine at 6, at 16, at 60, all of them smiling the same crooked welcome. The recorder was gone, melted into me, yet I still heard its motor turning, a tiny engine now housed in my chest. Each heartbeat advanced the tape by another frame of a life I hadn't lived yet. I could stop it, maybe. Rip the ribbon out, let it snap. But the ribbon was my pulse, and I had already pressed record on every future heartbeat. I walked, was carried, toward the center of the property, where the incision from last chapter still yawned. It had widened into a perfect circle, edges glowing that same violet fog, depthless and polite. Polite, because it waited for me to choose to step in, even though my legs were already leaning that way like flowers tracking a dying sun. Last chance, the child me whispered, except it wasn't a warning. It was an invitation to a party already in full swing on the other side of the drop. I could feel the ranch breathing through the soles of my feet, slow, patient, endless. Each exhale pushed more of that bruised light into the sky, until the heavens looked like one massive contusion healing in reverse. I lifted my foot, and the ground beneath the other one sagged, eager. Somewhere far off, a coyote screamed with my voice. Or maybe it was the tape finishing its loop. The sound rewound so many times it had learned to howl. I hovered at the edge, tasting copper, tasting home, tasting every listener's held breath like salt on the wind. Then the circle blinked, once, a slow, deliberate wink that promised the next step wasn't down, but through the tape, through the mirror, through you. And just before I let gravity finish the conversation, I realized the scariest part wasn't what waited below. It was that the recorder in my chest had begun to play something new, a soft, steady heartbeat that wasn't mine, but sounded just like yours. I never felt the landing. One heartbeat ago, I was dangling above the black throat of the tape, and now my boots are already on the ground, if ground is the word. Everything is dark, but it's the kind of dark that listens. I can feel it cupping its hands around my breath, tasting the shape of my name. The air is damp and smells like iron left out in the rain, like something once warm, now cooling into memory. I reach for the wall I remember, the root cellar's packed earth, and my fingers close on nothing. The walls are gone. Only thing left is the jar. It sits dead center in what used to be the floor, a plain mason jar, label long gone, glass fog from the inside. A single candle stub stands behind it. No flame, just the memory of one, like the idea of light waiting for permission. I crouch, knees popping like old hinges, and the jar rolls toward me, as if it's glad I came. Inside, something moves. Not liquid, not quite. It's a reflection, but it's looking the wrong way out. Straight at me, yes, but also past me, into the space where a listener ought to be. Into you. I should feel cold. Instead, I feel borrowed, like a coat that remembers the last neck it warmed. My hand reaches without asking permission, fingers circling the rim. The glass is wet, colder than skin, colder than regret. When I lift it, the weight is wrong. Too light. as though the reflection inside weighs more than the jar itself. And maybe it does. Maybe I've been carrying it all along, and only now noticed the strain. I twist the lid. Metal grinds metal. A soft shriek that sounds exactly like a tape spooling backwards. One full turn. 2, 3. Each click feels final, but the jar keeps accepting more. When the lid seats, the reflection inside flinches, folding in on itself like paper curling in fire. It doesn't like being closed in. Good. I tuck the jar against my chest, and that's when the sound starts. No, not sound. Pulse. A low thump-thump. Steady. Familiar. The same heartbeat I heard before I fell. Only now it's louder. And it isn't coming from the jar. It's coming from your headphones. I try to step back, but the darkness has grown legs. It paces with me, keeping perfect time. The candle stub is gone. Was it ever there? Doesn't matter. The jar is warm now, almost feverish, and the glass fogs on the outside instead of in. My thumb smears the condensation, and beneath it, I see not my fingerprint, but yours. A perfect spiral, identical to the whirl pressed against play on whatever device you're using right now. I don't know how I know that. I just do. The podcast app on my phone? Yes, I still have it, though the screen is cracked like old ice. Reads 00:00. End of file. End of story. Yet the audio keeps breathing in my ears. Slow, humid, intimate. It's inside the pulse, inside the blood you're using to hear me. That's the trick, isn't it? The tape never stopped. It just changed direction. Instead of recording me, it's recording you listening to me, listening to you. Round and round, until the grooves cut bone. I raise the jar to eye level. The reflection inside is clearer now. A listener-shaped absence surrounded by the faint outline of a room. Your room. I see the corner of a pillow, the edge of a curtain, the glow of a charger you forgot to unplug. The jar tilts, and the reflection tilts with it, obedient. I feel like I should apologize. But for what? For borrowing your heartbeat? For folding you into a story you thought was mine? For sealing you in glass while you were still warm? Too late. The lid is on. The pulse is steady. And something else is steady, too. The slow rotation of the jar in my hands, turning by degrees like a compass hunting north. Only it's not hunting north. It's hunting the next word you haven't said yet. It's hungry for the silence after the sentence you're forming right now. I want to set the jar down, but there is no down here. The darkness has erased even the idea of floor. Only the pulse gives any orientation, and it's moving. No, we're moving, drifting toward a place where sound becomes solid. I can feel the edges of your attention brushing past my face like spider silk, sticky, inevitable. The jar vibrates, sympathetic. Inside, the reflection begins to speak, lips moving in perfect sync with the next breath you haven't taken. And that's when I notice the crack. Hair thin, starting at the base of the jar, climbing the glass like frost on a window. Each heartbeat widens it. Each blink of yours widens it. Something is pushing from the inside, pressing palm prints against the glass from the wrong side of the mirror. I tighten my grip, but glass doesn't obey skin anymore. It obeys whatever's learning the shape of your name. The crack forks, lightning quick. A single bead of red, not blood, something brighter, slides out, rolls down the curve, and hangs at the lip. It trembles there, waiting for gravity to finish the conversation. And in that bead I see a room I've never visited, a bed I've never slept in, a face I promised not to describe. Your face. The bead lets go. The sound it makes when it hits the black stone is the same sound a play button makes when it's pressed for the very last time. Soft, final, hungry. And somewhere, far above or below, a lid starts to unscrew itself. End of chapter. It trips again, that red bead, only now it sounds like applause slowed down to the pace of a dying heart. I'm still kneeling on the same black stone, but the stone has begun to breathe. Shallow, like a sleeper pretending not to wake. And I understand the bead never fell. It waited, the way a trap waits for the ankle. Clears throat. Listen to me now, close, as if the phone were pressed to the bone behind your ear. If you're hearing this, the incision is complete. Not across my palm, not across the valley, but across whatever membrane separates a story from the place that story is told. The ranch is no longer 500 acres of Utah scrub. It is wherever you press play next. Your kitchen at 3 a.m., your car idling outside the laundromat, the silence between two songs on a broken jukebox. I used to think memory was a jar we carried. Now I know it's a wound we keep open. You felt it too, back in chapter whatever number was yours, when the jar turned out to be empty, except for the echo of your own pulse. That was the moment the ranch tasted you. And it liked the flavor. I'm walking now, though my legs never moved. The hoofbeats you hear are not behind me. They're inside the same bone that carries your earbuds. Distant, yes, but closing the way weather closes on a mountain town. Slow, certain, already too late. Every step is soft, wet, as though the ground has no intention of staying solid. The helicopters, they're looking for us, but the sky keeps folding them into smaller and smaller pieces until they sound like insects trapped in a glass. I want to tell them it's useless, that searchlights only make the dark smarter. But the words come out as static, the same static you're hearing right now between my breaths. Do you feel it? That wet thud, thud, thud? It isn't your heart, it's the ranch, beating in borrowed time. It keeps perfect rhythm with the one thing you thought was private. I tried to stop listening once. I pressed pause, flung the phone across the room, buried it under pillows. The beat only grew louder, like a drum stuffed inside my mouth. I asked the old caretaker, back when he still had a mouth, how to cauterize the connection. He told me sunrise does it. Play me again at sunrise, he said, and the wound scabs over. Then he showed me his chest, and I saw the scab was just another kind of mirror. So here we are, at the edge of whatever dawn this is. The light doesn't arrive. It leaks, the same way red leaked from the bead. First a bruised pink, then the color of teeth under ultraviolet. And with it, the replay button. One simple circle, glowing like a cigarette coal. I could leave it untouched. I could let the tape hiss die into morning bird song and walk away believing stories end. But endings are polite fictions we tell our shadows so they'll stay on the ground. The truth is simpler. The button wants to be pressed the way a throat wants to be cut. Listen. The helicopters have stopped. The hoofbeats have stopped. Even the heart between us has paused, curious. There is only the soft mechanical inhale of the reel taking up slack. I place my finger, no, your finger, on the warm plastic. It's not a restart. It's a reunion. The ranch opens wider, a smile with no face behind it. And in that widening, I see every place you thought was safe reduced to one thin corridor of sound. Press it. Not because you want to, but because you already did, back when you first mistook curiosity for free will. The red droplet trembles, then spreads, and the thud resumes, steady, possessive, eternal. And as the screen fades to black, that isn't black but deeper red, I leave you with this. The incision was never on the land. It was on the listener. Every time you return, the cut remembers the shape of your attention. So go ahead, replay. The ranch is wherever you press play next, and sunrise is just another word for bleeding in brighter light. I'll be here, in the hush between hoofbeats, waiting for the sound of your thumb. End